Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a little icebreaker poll for folks to fill out just to give us an idea of who's in the room and what everyone's experience is. So we'll leave that open for a few minutes as we get started for you to kind of share who you are and what you have going on. There's also a QR code. If you prefer to take it on your phone, you can go ahead and scan that. And I'll leave that up for a couple more seconds before we jump in. Okay, so this session is titled A Community Dialogue on Accessing Food Systems Funding. So if that's what you're here for, you are in the right place. In this section, the GFPI team, which is represented by me and Jane today, will be facilitating a conversation between applicants as well as reviewers for funding programs. And panelists, along with you all, the audience members, will answer a series of questions and take a deep dive into funding successes, challenges, emerging needs, as well as insights into their organization's funding journey or the support that they've given within the Metro Chicago landscape. And so the aim is for y'all to walk away with an understanding of the funding landscape and some examples of what that can look like, and how small farmers and food businesses have navigated diverse funding opportunities and or supported small farmers and food businesses through the funding opportunities in the ecosystem and the current landscape. And so at the end of this session, we will also share with y'all a list of funding resources, including toolkits, as well as a list of currently available funding opportunities that we've compiled. So that will all be available for you in a drive at the end of this session, as well as up on WebEx for you to access following the session. So we wanted to start off giving you a kind of overview of Chicago Food Policy Action Council and what it is you do and how GFPI fits into that. So CFPAC co-develops and facilitates and advocates for the implementation of policies that advance food justice and food sovereignty in Chicago and across the region. And CFPAC envisions a food system where all Chicagoans, regardless of race, class, gender, or social identity, have the right to a healthy and culturally appropriate food produced through community-driven, sustainable, and economically viable processes. So the Good Food Purchasing Program, which we call GFPP for short, aims to transform the way that public institutions purchase food by creating a transparent and equitable food system built on 5 core values, which are local economies, health, valued workforce, animal welfare, and environmental sustainability. And so GFPP provides a comprehensive set of tools and technical support and verification systems to assist institutions in meeting their program goals and commitments. And so GFPI is the implementation arm of those policies in Metro Chicago. And we envision a food system where our community institutions support and contribute to building collective power of those structurally excluded from control over food production and access to imagining, building, and tending to a liberatory food shed. And so the GFPI mission is to work to ensure that the places that feed our communities purchase and produce food that advances this good food system for all that I referenced. So a good food system is one that's accessible, it's equitable, it's racially just, it's healthy, fair, local, humane, and sustainable. And so this initiative is housed within Chicago Food Policy Action Council. And so I will pass it on to Jane to give a little bit more info about what we do at CFPAC.
All right, we're gonna wrap up the poll. The listed here are CFPAC's initiatives. So this is how we do the work. We mobilize networks and coalitions with events like our yearly Food Justice Summit and also the Rhizome Network, which is a group of passionate food justice advocates. Hold on, for some reason, it did not end the poll. Who participate in working groups to build a more equitable food system in Chicago. We also collaborate with partners to conduct research and share resources. Lastly, we influence and implement local policy through GFPP and our in-house grant, the GFPI Community Fund. So now we are going to move to introducing our panel. As Daniela mentioned, Jesse will not be here with us, but we have Laurel Sims, Michaela, and Kimberly. Laurel is a food system strategist with a 20-year commitment to empowering communities through initiatives rooted in urban ag. In the past, she's co-founded and served as the Chief Executive Officer of Urban Growers Collective, Growing Power Chicago, and Victory Programs Revision House Urban Farm in Massachusetts. She has been part of multiple small business and well-renowned leadership programs like the Castanea Fellowship. She is currently the executive director of Evanston Grows, which is a collaboration of nonprofits, schools, gardens, urban farms, and residents with a mission to increase healthy food access and promote food literacy, as well as advance health equity by building a fresh, local food system that is more just, sustainable, and resilient. We also have with us Michaela Bach, who supports farm to food access grants like Illinois Eats, and leads supply chain coordination work, including mapping the missing middle infrastructure that connects farmers to eaters. As a food systems outreach associate at Illinois Extension, Michaela works to advance statewide efforts to reimagine and strengthen community food systems. She is also a former Food Justice Summit leader, and she believes that food is a powerful tool for connection, resilience, and collective resilience. And lastly, we have with us Kimberly Britt, who is the founding member and board president of Shy Fresh Kitchen, a worker cooperative owned by women and minorities that provides fresh, nutritious meals to institutions committed to health and wellness. In addition, Kimberly leads the delivery team and the purchasing at Shy Fresh. She is also the co-owner of Jumpstart Housing Cooperative and a member of the Peer Advisor Fellowship with the U.S. Federation Worker Cooperatives, and also serves on their board. So next slide. So before we dive into the discussion with our panelists, we wanted to give you a short overview of what a funding journey can look like for food and farm businesses. So this is an outline right here of a progression of the stages of funding. To clarify, the terms early stage and late stage that we have here aren't the official terms that you would use at a bank or a funding agency. We described it this way to provide a simple way to understand funding opportunities that may be a better fit for organizations that are in the earlier stages of growth versus more established businesses looking to take on more financial risks. The progression that we have here from early to late is a funding progression from funding opportunities with the least amount of risk to more risk. The next slide. So with this stage of funding, we're thinking of grant programs and forgivable loans where there is low financial burden. Usually entry-level grants, often referred to as micro grants, may require minimal documentation, simple application process, low barrier eligibility for early stage businesses. And typically for most folks, the journey often starts with your own resources or support from your community. For most business owners, though, this is typically not sustainable. So you'll have to start thinking of ways to diversify your funding in order to continue growing your business. I'm sure we've all heard it takes money to make money, and lack of funding is usually the biggest barrier for businesses looking to either launch or grow their businesses. Next slide. As the visual illustrates, starting with entry-level opportunities is a great way to start building up your experience and your capacity that you'll need later on when you're exploring those funding opportunities that require you to take on a bit more risk. This could include starter loans, reimbursement-based grants, where organizations are typically have to provide the funds up front, but then you get reimbursed later in the grant period. Then you could move on to other opportunities like impact investments and loans. Impact investment means accessing growth capital either through, it could be through loans that have just more flexible terms, or you are also trading a small stake in your business. I'm going to pass it off to KP to finish off the different stages of funding.
And this is Daniela jumping in. KP needs to jump off and back on because they're having some volume and mute problems. So I'm going to take over with presenting the PowerPoint while KP does that.
Okay, and I could keep going.
Perfect. If you don't mind, Jane, I will be switching out, putting the PowerPoint up so y'all might see it come off screen and back on screen while we manage. Thank you, guys.
All right. And then the last section right here titled late stage. This is where, once your business is a little bit more established, then you are starting to thinking about ways to access like long-term funding in order to maintain sustainability. We could go to the next slide. What's important about like the stages of funding is each step is basically building your capacity and your experience for the next level of funding. For example, the early seed and micro grants can help you establish those practices, because oftentimes grants require a certain amount of documentation. And this will prepare you for more complex opportunities, such as those that you see in the intermediate stages. However, more than likely, you probably won't be able to finance your entire business with just grants. So when you get to the stage of your business, when you need more funding, you could venture towards opportunities that require a little bit more financial risk, like the government grants and traditional loans. So what we've presented here is just an example of a funding journey, but not necessarily everyone's funding journey. What we're simply aiming to give is context for different funding vehicles that you can use that do exist. So we can.
All right. Thank you, Jane. Now we can jump into the discussion with our panelists and learn about their experiences with funding in Metro Chicago. So this first question is for Michaela. Michaela, from your unique experience and perspective as folks who support applicants through Illinois Eats, and have been on the other side of the table as grant reviewers, and we can go to the next slide here. I'd like you to put yourself in the shoes of someone who is applying for a grant opportunity for the first time, and it can be daunting and overwhelming experience, and hoping you can give our applicants advice for navigating grant applications when perhaps the RFP is complicated or overwhelming, and particularly advice for folks who do not have grant writers or much prior experience in this process.
Sure. Thanks for the question, KP. I would say your first step is to do your homework. So take a look at the grant application and really read through the eligibility criteria to see if your farm or food business is even eligible for this grant. Also, is there a match required, meaning that the amount that you're applying for in some cases has to be equally met by your own personal funding or other means of
That's how they
matching?
get you hooked. I don't call for that.
right? And
Yeah,
match.
I mean, I've tried the raspberry.
So take a look to see if a match is required and start thinking about if that is something that your business will be able to provide. In some cases, a match can be provided by in-kind donations. So, labor or expertise from someone who's willing to donate their time. So there are creative ways around that, but just keep that in mind. Also, most grants either require or would benefit from letters of support. And I would argue that even if a letter of support isn't specifically requested, it almost always will bolster your application. So take a look to see, and essentially letters of support are from folks that really believe in your cause. Other are food businesses or farmers that would benefit. I've seen letters of support from legislators that really believe in the impact this would have on their community, extension staff, et cetera. So really you're just kind of gathering your team. It's like letters of recommendation that you would use for, a personal case. Um, Also, very, very importantly, make sure that you look and review to see if there are any pre-grant qualification requirements. I would say that this is more standard in that sort of like intermediate to late stage of the timeline that Jane laid out for us. But pre-qualification requirements are typically required for state or federal funding. I can talk specifically to the local food infrastructure grant that is out right now. That's specifically for infrastructure for farms and food businesses. Before you can even get to the entire application process, you have to register in something called sam.gov. You have to register and get a number in the GATA, Grant Accountability and like Transparency Act, I think is what it stands for. But the GATA system, and you have to register in Amplifund. So before you can even think about applying or the state will even review your application, you have to navigate 3 different state systems. And I'm not saying that to scare anyone. I'm just saying that as a way to encourage you to start this process early and why it is so important to review all of these things up front. Because even with letters of support, as I read them, I can tell if you actually have a demonstrated commitment with this community partner, or if you scrambled last minute to find someone that would vouch for your project. So read through everything that you need before even starting the application. If there are pre-qualification requirements, start those as soon as you possibly can. Those 3 state systems can take as long as 2 weeks to navigate. And last but not least, if there are office hours available, which varies from grant to grant, and I think GFPI is a really wonderful example, go to office hours. They are so helpful. You can have answers or any question that you have answered directly. So really take advantage of that technical assistance opportunity. I offered them for Illinois Eats, and folks really joined at every stage. So even if you're considering if this is a good fit or not, take advantage of those office hours and hear from the experts themselves. And remember that this grant is going to be the hardest grant, the first grant you write. Once you have that first grant, you can pull, what you learned and some of your mission statements from that.
Thank you so much, Michaela. I feel like you covered all of the pieces for folks of like what to consider, and also appreciative of touching on the local food infrastructure grant that just came out, because I'm sure folks have questions about that as well. So if there's any follow-up questions on that, we can touch on that in the Q&A section at the end too. So I'm going to keep you talking, Michaela. A follow-up to this question, and we can move to the next slide. As you're supporting applicants who securing contracts, grants, or in the reviewing process for grant applications and grant programs, what are some of the common pitfalls that you're seeing with farmers and food businesses? What are the pitfalls and the issues that folks are having? And how would you advise folks to correct or avoid these mistakes so that they're not more so that they are more easily able to access funding opportunities and market opportunities?
I really like this question a lot, KP, because as I read grant applications, I sometimes think, oh, if you just would have done this, it would have been so much stronger. The first pitfall I often see is whether there's a grant writer or not, the project being proposed is not always cohesive. And what I mean by that is folks tend to have this long wish list of things that they want or need for their farm or food business. And they see this opportunity for funding and they throw all of those things into the ask and hope it will get funded. And I think that it's absolutely possible to get a variety of things funded as long as you tell a through line story of why this wash and pack station is relevant to this cold storage truck, which is relevant to needing labor to prep food in your community kitchen. So tell us a story and make sure that all of the things that you're asking for fall within the lines and boundaries of that story. The second thing I would advise is if you have data, I know data can be hard to gather, but data really does strengthen an application. And even, it doesn't have to be particularly formal, but if you currently serve X amount of community members out of your commercial kitchen, and you think that this equipment will allow you to serve double that, that kind of goes into the storytelling side of things and demonstrating the impact that this funding would have on your project. Uh, Also, last but not least, we do review your budget. So when budgets are required, we are required to look at those. And sometimes I'll see folks have one line and it just says equipment, and they have a number for equipment that they expect to spend. And I think this goes into the detail that I look for when I'm reviewing, in that tell us the exact equipment that you're looking for. And I don't necessarily need a quote for every single thing, but if you're listing out, like, I need hose for my garden, I need water lines, I need a hoop house, like getting into that granular level of detail really shows me that you've thought through exactly what you need to get this project done. If there's large equipment involved, such as a hoop house, or you want to pay people to install that hoop house for you, if you can get a quote from that contractor or from that hoop house business, again, that just goes to show that you've really, really thought this through and you're really prepared and ready to activate this opportunity if you get this funding. So, quick summary of what I said, because I've been talking a lot. Make sure you tell a cohesive story. If you're asking for random things, make sure they fit under one project bucket. Include data. Doesn't have to be formal, but whatever data you can give us, that'll help. And add as much detail to your budget as possible, if not only also adding quotes if it's for larger asks.
Two other points that hoping you can touch on high level. We can move to the next slide. Is there any big misconceptions that farmers and food business owners have regard applying to funding that you've been seeing and or their eligibility? And then you'll see on the next slide, part two of that would be, is there anything that you think every applicant should know before they hit submit?
Mm.
So big
I,
misconception and yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, I think a common misconception when I talk to farms and food businesses is that folks really think that they're not going to get funding unless they can pay for a grant writer. And I think that's untrue. I think that certainly a grant writer can support your process, but I think it is possible to get funding without a grant writer as long as you put in the time and intention to really flesh out the project that you're looking for and the amount of funding you would like for that project. And I can go a little bit more into that in a later, in maybe the second part of this question. Um, I think my final thought on that is, yeah, you don't need a grant writer. As a reviewer, I'm aware that, there are farms and food businesses that don't have access to funds for a grant writer. So I really try to keep that as part of my process, and how I'm scoring applications. The second part of the question, what do you think every applicant should know before they hit submit? two things here. One is that collaborative applications or single applications, if you're applying for just your business with demonstrated support from your community, are often the strongest applications. And there's a difference between working with someone one time versus a true collaborative partnership. And often we can tell in your application where you are in that partnership. And I think letters of support, again, even if they're not asked for, I really think they can strengthen, because this is how you can strategically demonstrate, hey, the mayor of my town really believes in this. The alderman is so bought in with this project. This farmer down the street is going to start selling to me when I prepare their ingredients. And the school that I'm going to sell this meal to is going to, is really looking forward to this opportunity to receive. And so strategically using your letters of support to round out and show that you have a diverse crowd of people that believe in you and are cheering for you can really, really help strengthen any application.
All right, thanks, Michaela, for that. So we'd like to give the audience an opportunity to answer a question. For those who've applied to funding before, what's an approach a funder has implemented, whether in the application process, the reporting, or the follow-up, that you wish funders would replicate? So you could add your answers in the chat. I see some folks adding some questions. We will make sure to circle back towards the end of the presentation and see if Michaela could answer, or Laurel or Kim could answer. All right, so we'll circle back to those answers. Please keep adding your responses in the chat. I'll repost the question just in case folks are joining in a little bit late, but we want to pivot to Laurel and Kim and hear about your experiences on the applicant side of things now that we've asked Michaela questions about being on the other side, reviewing applications and providing support. So before you received your funding opportunity, how do you approach it? So how do you approach looking for funding opportunities, and what are your main priorities when identifying potential funders? We could start with Laurel, and then Kim, you could answer.
Thanks so much for having me. I think one of the biggest challenges when you're looking initially for funding is that you lack credibility. So when you first start out, no one really knows who you are. And so you're really trying to kind of create that track record and prove yourself as an organization and as a partner. And so I think the biggest piece and the biggest lesson I've learned is that relationships are far more important than the proposal. So really developing those on the ground relationships. And that includes just like folks who are walking by your farm, folks who are volunteering at your farm, people who are giving small donations, even if it's $5, really cultivating that, because those first 3 years are difficult, especially when you don't have 990 financials to really kind of show that financial track record. So without that, getting large grants is almost impossible. And I feel like a lot of folks, especially on the nonprofit side, kind of dig into these huge grants as a newbie, and then they're super disappointed because they're not getting any of them. So I think my advice is really to do smaller grants that are a little bit more tailored to projects instead of just like overall mission. Um, you always want you always just like, you want funding that's going to cover everything, including your staff, but that's really difficult at the beginning. So if you can prove that track record, especially on kind of project-based proposals, I think that helps tremendously. I also think that looking at local foundations that are near you, so whether they're neighborhood-based or kind of more community-based, looking at those smaller nonprofits who can come out, who you can show around to really help cultivate those relationships. And those grants are usually between like, $5,000 and $20,000 or $5,000 and $20,000, but they're really great to help start you out. And then I think the third thing is we very much don't focus on individual giving. And I think it's one of the keys to making a successful nonprofit. So really cultivating the folks who are giving you their dollars, whether it's $5 or thousands of dollars, is really making sure that they feel that investment is paying off, that they are part of your goal and your mission, and that they feel like that they're receiving the gratitude so that they want to continue to give to you. So those are kind of, I think, the things that I focused on a lot. The last thing I'll say, and this is just to kind of touch on, a little bit on what Michaela was speaking about too, is when you are writing grants, really setting yourself up for success. So creating a boilerplate where you take some of those questions that are coming out of grants, because many of them are the same, many of them are repetitive, putting them in a document and organizing that document. So, if there's a question about your board, having that, have a board section, have a staff section, have, if they're asking about equity and your beliefs around that, have those paragraphs there so you don't have to remember what was that grant that I applied for that had that language. Have it all in one document because it'll make your life a lot easier.
And then same question for you, Britt, just to understand like the other side of farm versus like a catering business.
Yeah, so with Shop Fresh Kitchen being a worker cooperative, just finding funders who have the same mission and same value as us was a difficult process. We ran into a lot of defeat it with the banks and just trying to acquire loans in the beginning because we was a worker cooperative. So it was like important for us to get our name out there and just really tell our story to our community and just get aligned with funders like SIFPAC and the American Heart Association was essential in the beginning of our business. We started off in the heart of the pandemic. And so like funding went kind of in a roller coaster reverse mode for us because at that time there were a lot of grant opportunities, especially if you was in the food business to get food out. And so once the pandemic ended, it was essential for us to try to find a way to continue to keep our business growing. And so just finding loans that really, understood our mission and the direction that we was going in was like a major thing for us at that time. And also just acquiring, like Laurel just said, those micro grants and just applying them to our food and then acquiring major contracts like with the daycare centers and different private institutes like that were also ways that we looked at funding our business in the beginning. And the way that we chose to identify those funders was we always refer back to our budget, that plan that we put together, the things that we prioritize as a way to know the flow of our business and the things that we needed funding for at that time. So, like, my advice would be to just always look at that plan that you made surrounding your budget and just approach grants from that perspective. You know, you already in the process of doing that work. You know that that's the direction that you want to go in to grow and escalate that business. So looking back at your budget, the plan that you surrounded around that is the way that we chose to approach looking for funding.
Thanks. We had some other follow-up questions that you answered. So thank you for that very comprehensive answer. I wanted to ask another question back to Laurel. If you could speak to specific challenges of finding funding that understands the mission of your organization rather than like fitting you into like a specific box. Like what has that looked like?
Yeah, I think it's just exactly what Kimberly said. It's that it's making sure that you are tapped into your mission and your plan, and that you are constantly using that as a touchstone, because it's so easy to kind of go down these roads that will take you into places that you don't necessarily want to be in. And so, if your goal is really food access and education, those are the grants you're going to go after, and those are the partnerships you're going to go after. So whether that's corporations, whether that's foundations, if folks are trying to kind of pull you away from that, that's not a good fit. And those are not dollars I think that you should go after, even though it looks, sometimes you need those dollars. But I think the more true you stay to your organizational mission, again, you're going to build that credibility with the partners that you're actually trying to build relationships with, that they see that you are really, doing the work and staying aligned with what you're trying to project. And so I think the more you can do that, the better. And I think there's a lot of, there are definitely some funders that, I don't like taking. And so if they're not, equity aligned, if they're not values aligned, even though they may be funding food systems work, I don't know that necessarily that's a good fit for our organization or the story we want to tell to the folks that we are in partnership with, and we are collaborating with, because it makes us look less credible. So again, I think partnerships are key, and really staying true to your values is the way to, I think, really build a successful business.
That is a fantastic answer. We're gonna pass it back to you, Michaela. Just based on some of the applications that you've, supported people through, what type of projects or business models that you're seeing get funded right now? Like where are those like grant dollars and support flowing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I would bring us back to the first, an earlier answer, in that collaborative projects, I think, are the future. I think we see more and more grants that are either scoring you more highly for having collaborative projects or higher for stronger letters of rec, or in some cases, like the local food infrastructure grant, you can apply for a significantly larger amount of money. So it's really just getting us to do more with less, which I think is the right thing. And it also is emphasizing that relational component that Laurel is really talking about. I personally, when scoring, and the projects that I see get funded are the proposals that can really clearly answer four main questions. So why your organization? Why this specific project? Why now? And who will your project benefit? I think the why now piece is particularly important, because I need to know that there's this bottleneck or issue or something that is inhibiting your organization from growing, that if you are funded, it will unlock all of these things and all of these benefits. And I think that's the piece that I see folks most often forget and skip over. If I can't answer those questions after reading your application, it makes it very challenging for me to recommend this application if other folks are very successfully answering these questions. I think another thing that makes a project fundable is showing detail. Data is something I talked about. Letters of support is something I talked about. But even within the application itself, I see projects that, for example, want to procure from local farmers, but they're not actually listing any specific farmers or aggregators that they want to work with, which makes it hard for me to believe that they have those relationships that it takes to actually procure local food in this example. Or an example on the flip side, farmers or food businesses that want to partner with hospitals or want to partner with food pantries to launch, let's say, a medically tailored meal program, but then they don't list the exact food pantries they want to work with, and they don't list the hospitals that they have relationships with. And I think, it makes it doesn't emphasize the relational element that you have that infrastructure in place. And it also kind of hurts the credibility because anyone can say they want to buy local food and do medically tailored meals, but if you have the backing of this hospital network or pantry network, it really, really does give you that boost of credibility. I saw someone in the chat ask me to circle back those points. Would you like me to do that now, Jane?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So the things that make your application more fundable, in my opinion, is if you answer why your organization, so going into the mission, why this specific project within your organization, which touches on kind of Kimberly's note of where in the journey are you in your business plan? Why right now? So why is this a good timing for you to receive this funding? And who will your project benefit?
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Michaela. And you actually answered our follow-on questions. If you can hit to the next two slides for us, Daniela. You touched on the fundable proposal, and then great. So we're going to pass it back to our farm and food businesses and ask some questions on the flip side of this process. So you can go to the next slide. Kim and Laurel, we can start with Kim. Can you share with us what your internal process looks like after you've received a grant and how you navigate through it? So once you've actually received this funding opportunity, talk a bit about the management process. How do you make sure you're meeting those deliverables, as well as what does the relationship look like with the funders after contracts have been signed? Kind of just, you don't have to go super in depth, but kind of just touch on the pieces there that come up for you.
Yeah, so I'll just tell the story of like a central need that we recently had in Shy Fresh Kitchen with doing these medically tailored meals and just we hadn't previously anticipated having so many clients in this area. And so just figuring out a route, we were manually figuring out a route system to use, which days to go through. We had to work and hire several different consultants and get a lot of logistical pieces like download apps and things like that. So that was a hard journey for us that we did not necessarily anticipate being a problem when we decided that we wanted to deliver medically tailored meals throughout our community. And so our 2024 award with GFPI just came at the perfect time. We were able to work alongside consultants and ensure that our menus were actually medically tailored and with the right amount of ingredients to address diabetes and heart disease. We also acquired this app. It's called Routific that we put those addresses in from a Google sheet, and it gives us a agenda on which places that we'll be going on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday throughout that process. So at first, initially, like I said, we was trying to do all of this work manually. and it was very, very time consuming. And after receiving that award, we were able to navigate that, and now it has become one of Shy Fresh Kitchen's major sources of revenue at this particular point in time. Routific, I highly recommend using that. And as I said before, working alongside with KP and Jane throughout this journey, all of this work was so fresh and brand new for us, and they were very extremely flexible and keeping us on track with our milestones and just different offerings. I've been to so many different events with them that I met a lot of different people. I recently at the Offers and Needs meet met a farmer who is willing to actually plant the seeds for the produce that we incorporate in our home delivered meals. So that was like a big thing for us, and who we purchase from. Who we are aligned with is major for Shy Fresh Kitchen, because that's our whole reasoning for being a worker cooperative, to bring economic justice back to our communities. And we, of course, thought the best way to be able to do that was through food. So just being able to expand and scale our business in that way and meet new people along the way and network with them and get straight from the farm produce and fruits just brings the flavor and our culture to the next level in our organization.
Amazing. Thank you for touching on that, Kim, and all the different pieces there for Shy Fresh. Laurel, do you have anything to add there about the management process and the grant management or funding management and how you navigate that?
Yeah, well, I'm also going to shout you and Jane out because I completely agree. I think the best funders become your partners, and it's a collaborative relationship instead of a top-down relationship. And so I think working with you all, not only from just like a reporting end where we kind of work together on the reports. It's not something like we handwrite at the end. We go through and have conversations about it, where I think the communication is really open and we're really allowed to like talk about our successes, but also our challenges, and that everyone is learning so that the process for the next round of funding becomes even better because you all as funders are learning alongside with us. And I think it really helps create more of a horizontal versus vertical funding source. But I think the other thing I would add is, well, two things. One is that I think it's important, even before you really start getting grants, to start getting that data. And that's really true because that data is needed not just for foundations, but also just so you can tell your story. So making sure that and that like how many pounds of produce you're growing, how much you're growing at each of your farm sites, how many participants were part of your programming, how much food did you distribute. So like knowing all those numbers ahead of time, I think really helps with that storytelling and the impact. But more importantly, I also think at the beginning, it's so much easier to implement those systems than when you're 5 years in and people have been working together for a really long time and they have the way they're going to do stuff. And they're like, what? You're making me do more? But that more is so important for them to get paid and to have jobs. And so, making sure I think that at the front end is really successful just makes it easier for everyone moving through. Um, what the expectations are for their role in the organization. And the other thing is I would like make sure to use tools. So for us, we use QuickBooks Online. And so for the funding that we receive that is project specific, we tag it. So I know I spent X amount of dollars. Actually, Jesse gave us a grant for compost bins. And so I know when we spend the money on the lumber for those compost bins that I'm going to tag I am shy for it. And so that when I have to go back and do my reporting, it's super easy versus like me having to sort through receipts and figure out, oh, what was this lumber for? Who do I bill it to? So just having that on the front end when you're doing your monthly reconciliation, that you're just tagging those receipts and making sure that when you can do those searches really easily so that you're not spending a lot of time on reports that you don't have time for. You need to do the you want to do the work on the mission, not on like, piling through receipts. So the better organized you are on that front end, the easier it is so that you can do the real job and the real work that you want to do.
Awesome. Thank you so much for both of your responses. Just a time check, we have about 8 minutes left before we're going to move into the Q&A. I think in your responses, you kind of answered both of the follow-up questions we have here. So I am going to pivot to a question for you, Michaela. Oh, perfect. We also have a question for the audience, just in the essence of time. I'm just going to drop it in the chat and let you guys respond, but I'll be scooping up all of your answers and recording them for later and follow-up. So please still put your response. The question is, what type of funds and or resources do you wish existed? I do the in-house fund at CIFPAC, the community fund, and we have other folks who have their hands in different funds around Metro Chicago. So really looking to hear from you all about what the need from the folks in the chat, our farmers and food business owners, or even other support organizations that you wish was out there. So I just dropped that questions in the chat, and then we'll go to the next slide. This question is for Michaela. Now that we've talked about the front end of receiving funding, I'd like to explore the later stages of funding where folks are actually securing sustainable long-term funding sources, whether that's in the form of grants, maybe loans, contracts, or otherwise. And for many of our farmers and food business organizations, there are supply chain assets that are missing in their communities, which hinder their growth. And so, Michaela, hoping you can touch just a little bit on the missing middle and the biggest gaps that need to be funded in Illinois to booster the local food supply chain.
Thank you, KP. I would love the opportunity to talk about the missing middle. So my role is statewide, just for some perspective here. And with Illinois Eats and with the food system roadmap sessions, we did listening sessions throughout the entire state where we talked like folks like y'all in the room and heard from hundreds of nonprofits and farmers and aggregators and food pantries, et cetera, about what are the gaps. And it maybe isn't surprising that infrastructure comes up time and time and time again as the biggest bottleneck to growing a local food system in Illinois. Specifically within that infrastructure, this is where we're talking about the missing middle, which is anything after the farm and before the consumer. I would argue there's some missing on farm as well, and that can be challenging to access. But the missing middle in particular refers to the things that it takes to get the food from the farm to the end of the supply chain, to the eater. Things in that pathway are missing, and things specifically that come up as the biggest gaps are cold storage. Across the whole supply chain, cold storage is really, really hard to access, and everyone, whether you're a farmer or a food pantry, or you're starting a local food business, almost everyone wants cold storage in some degree. Meat processing also comes up as a really big gap in a statewide purview. I had farmers that worked with the Illinois Eats program that had to schedule their meat processing dates over an entire year in advance, or they had to drive 4 hours one way just to access that infrastructure they needed. And the third thing in terms of hard infrastructure, I would say is missing is aggregators. We have some, there's momentum in the aggregator space in Illinois, but if we're really looking at helping smaller farms access larger markets, aggregators really are the key to that in many ways because they allow farmers to farm. They take the burden off of navigating buyer relationships, sometimes can support with food safety, also can unlock cold storage. And so aggregation really, I think, is the future of local food. And so any funding directed in that area will only benefit the missing middle. I have been talking a lot about hard infrastructure, but I also want to touch on the soft infrastructure that's missing. And when I say soft infrastructure, it's really the glue, that connective tissue that can really make all of this happen more efficiently. So two examples are one project I'm working on is creating a map of this missing middle. So we know how much is actually missing, I think is a really great starting point as we try to draw more funds into the space and making that need really clear to funders and state agencies. Um, and also folks that are, I would call them value chain coordinators, but essentially that the folks that can help manage the farmer and buyer relationships or help connect farmers to buyers that really understand where farmers are at in their growing journey, or food businesses are at in their business journey, and where markets are at and what types of food sources that they're looking, and to have someone really be that matchmaker and that can kind of navigate those conversations and those relationships. Currently, the space doesn't have a lot of support in soft infrastructure, and I think that the more support we get in that sort of connective tissue, it will only unlock more sales and more business for more farms and ultimately more local food.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Michaela, for touching on that. We have so many questions that we're not going to get time to touch on all of them. But we wanted to wrap with one final question to pose to the three of you. So we're going to skip a bunch of slides. It's the one before this. Um, mm, Sorry, I'm actually not entirely sure which slide it is, but I'll read it to you and I'll put it in the chat. So Laurel and Kim, you've both built organizations from the ground up. And Michaela, you sat on both sides of the funding table. Oops, sorry, that's actually not the question. Haha. Oh, this is the question. We want to talk about collaboration. So many people access funding in silos, but that's not the only way that funding is available. And so we'd like you to all to share about your bit of your experience with collaborative funding and market opportunities, whether that's a partnership established, something that you've seen in a support role, or a collective that you're a part of, or maybe a collaboration that you've witnessed. And Michaela, you touched a bit on how collaboration is the future, and hoping just to kind of get like a round robin, if that's the word, of each of your kind of takes on this, and then we'll move into our Q&A for the last 10 minutes here. So we can start with Kim. Do you want to start us off?
Yeah. Yeah. So we have been fortunate enough to have over 6,100 square foot commercial kitchen. Of course, Chef Fresh Kitchen does not need all of that space. So over the last couple of years, we've had the opportunity to partner with some great partners like Grow Greater Inglewood, who does a farm stand over the summer, and they needed space to do their preparation work as well as cold storage. So we definitely had the opportunity to rent out that space to them and have them use that to prepare for their farms, as well as they leftover inventory, right? We got first dibs on the leftover inventory, they produce and fruit, and it was right on the scene that we got to incorporate that into some of our home delivered meals. We have from the beginning collaborated with Urban Growers Collective, who is one of our main partners, our vital partners that we get produce from the common market. We did a collaboration with them and Rush to address food insecurity here in the Chicagoland area. And yeah, so those are just a few of the partnerships and collaborations that we use, not necessarily to boost up our funding. I was happy to hear you say that, Michaela. And so I got a different way of thinking of how to approach funding from this, but just to stay in solidarity with our community of cooperatives and small Black businesses or small businesses all together in our community and just keep it an even flow.
Amazing. And just, do you have any high-level responses, Laurel?
Yeah, I would just say, I think one of the things I love doing collaborative grants, and because I think it allows us to build partnerships that are even better. I think so many times when businesses kind of look at partnerships, it's very transactional. And I think when you're mission aligned, you really get to be able to build these beautiful things that as one organization you couldn't do. But with multiple organizations, you can build like really beautiful projects and you can reach so many more people. And I think really, both on kind of an educational lens, but also as an empowerment lens. I do think it's important though, as you're walking into those relationships to make sure that kind of everyone's on the same page and they know what their roles and expectations are, to not just kind of hope for the best. I think having those conversations ahead of time, so that everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing, what the expectations are, so that the grant can move forward really well, is super helpful. And then I also think what just kind of going back to what we've all talked about a little bit throughout this is making sure that those partnerships are really mission aligned with you. So making sure that those partnerships, their mission and priorities align with your organizations. Do we all have the capacity to manage our workload? And then also, I think for all funding opportunities, not just with partnerships, but is it a funding opportunity that'll be sustainable? Because I think one of the things that's hardest for communities is when it's a short-term project and it disappears because funding disappears. So kind of the lens that I always look at is this going to allow us to build something that we can continue with and it can be sustainable and have a long-term impact? Or is it just, oh, we're going to build this farm and then next year we don't know how we're going to fund it? So I think it's really making sure that those partnerships are sustainable and that when you start impacting community, you can do that long term and really make a huge impact with the folks that you're working with.
Amazing. And then we will close with you, Michaela, and then move into about the 5 minutes we have left for the Q&A.
I think Laurel and Kimberly really touched on most of what I would say. So my only
Amazing.
add is that food system work is so foundational on relationships. We don't have a resilient food system without a relational food system. And this is not my quote, but I think it's really relevant, especially with all this talk of infrastructure and funding. But trust is the real infrastructure.
Amazing. These like little tagline quotes and taking notes here. So thank you all so much for your responses, your thought, just sharing your experience. We have about 5 minutes for the Q&A. I know Daniela, you had been kind of keeping up with things that were put into the chat. So we'll also can post some questions and answers potentially on the WebEx following the session. But if there's any Q&A that we want to get to in these last 5 minutes, Daniela, I'll let you kind of point us in the right direction there. And feel free to drop extra questions in the chat and we can try to get those answered following the session.
Thank you so much. One of these was for Michaela, and it was going right back to your first question, which was, can you share the sites to register with when you are applying for grants? And I think that ask is actually to share that in the chat if you're able to, Michaela.
Yeah, I can share that in the chat. This is going to be specifically for the local food infrastructure grant, but it is going to be relevant to almost every state and federal grant.
And then we had a question, curious how to quantify for a nonprofit in the pop-up stage where there are many community events happening, event registration numbers or number of contacts on the list. I think this is a question regarding data. Sam, if you are still on the call, if you want to hop off of mute to elaborate on that question as well, please feel free.
Yes, for sure. So I'm a volunteer with Plate and Pathways, and we're based out of Rogers Park. And basically, right now, we're doing a lot of food distribution as well as a lot of nutrition education for youth and families. So we're very heavily reliant on like community partnerships and sharing kitchen spaces that exist and things like that. But we don't have a physical like central location. And I'm just wondering, how do we prove the necessity of a physical space and start funding for that? Would event registration be enough? Would it be number of events, or how to quantify that to show the need?
I can take a stab at it. I think what it goes back to me is why does not having a physical space, how is that hindering your business and its potential? And if you can answer that in your narrative and with data, I think that will set you up for success. And on the flip side, if you were funded with this physical space, what opportunities would that unlock? How many new partnerships would you expect to come out of that? How many more people would you expect to serve? So I think you can either go the negative or positive side of things. And honestly, I would recommend covering both.
Thank you. That's super helpful.
And then the last question I got from the chat was, what are the best sources of finding available grants? Which may be another question for Michaela.
Now, we do have a compiled list of available grant opportunities and things that we'll be sharing momentarily in the chat, and it will also be available on WebEx. So we've compiled some for you and some toolkits as well, but just maybe like one resource from each of you as we wrap of what's your, go-to, where do you guys, Laurel and Kim, find grants, and then Michaela, where do you kind of direct folks to? And we can start with Michaela if you don't mind.
Sure. I think honestly, I would recommend signing up for any and all relevant newsletters. That's where I learn about grants that I pop into my newsletter. So I know SIFPAC has a newsletter. Listservs sometimes have grant opportunities, but really get on every local listserv of any organization that is values aligned and doing the same type of work you're trying to do. And I think that will put you in the right direction.
Agreed. I'd also say that if there are foundations or funders that do food systems work, to get on their mailing list, because they usually will send out an email when applications are open, and so that's a really great way. But again, I'm going to emphasize partnerships. A lot of the grants that come our way come from partners. From like KP sent me a couple last week. A cafe we work with in Evanston sent me two last week, and so everybody who's kind of looking, we're all kind of looking out for each other. So creating that goodwill between your partners, so that, when I see something, I send it to folks, and just making sure that we're getting the word out, because I think that's really the best kind of networking. I mean, there's definitely some programs like Candid and some others that are a little more expensive that you can go through, but it's also a lot of time and energy, and they're not always food related. And so you can definitely do that. And I'm not going to tell anybody not to do that, but I think the kind of word of mouth and creating the networks within the folks you work with is the best way to do it.
Yes, and I don't know what else to add. Y'all said it all, just emails, partnerships, networking, just getting your organization out in the community are majority of the ways that and also being a part of the Federation of Worker Cooperatives has brought us a lot of grant opportunities as well, and just remembering the solidarity part, sharing it to the next organization, and helping them remember to think about you when they get a grant opportunity.
Amazing. Thank you guys so much. That closes the session. So if everyone could stay on for a moment and take a poll, just so we're able to continue to improve the experience of the summit for years to come, that would be amazing. And that'll be released momentarily. Aside from that, reach out to me or Jane. Our emails will be available on WebEx, and we'll drop them in the chat if there's any questions, any follow-up questions we didn't get to. We'll post them on WebEx as well. And yeah, thank you everyone for attending. Thank you so much to our panelists for sharing. And Jane, if you have anything to add as we wrap, that is it from me.
Yeah, just make sure you take advantage of all of the back-end networking that you could do on WebEx. So if you haven't gotten a chance to, just scroll, look at like the agenda for the rest of the sessions for today, and also folks that you could reach out to directly. And all of the resources, as KP shared, will be provided on WebEx.
You should be seeing the poll on your window. If you don't yet, look for a red notification at the bottom of your Zoom. This is actually the last session of the day, so thank you so much for joining us. It's hard to believe it's already the end of our second day of the summit, and we hope we'll see you tomorrow if you're able to join us at the South Shore Cultural Center. Thank you, everyone. And I will, oh, go ahead.
Thanks, Jane and KP. See you tomorrow.
Thank you, Michaela.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for your time.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you all. I'll be closing out now.